Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Claire and this is going to be start of a spoiler-filled reading vlog for Sarah J Maas's latest release, A Court of Silver Flame, which is the start of another trilogy in the Court of Thorns and Roses world. It's third-person POV following Nesta and Cassian. Pre-ordered the book on Audible, so I've been listening to it ever since it was released on Tuesday, every single day, usually for at least an hour. I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the book thus far. I have plenty of videos on basically all of Sarah J Maas's books, including individual ones for the Court of Thorns and Roses series, which is a series, while has its occasional problems or issues that I find odd or quirky or downright annoying, is a series that I love and that I definitely hold close to my heart. When I read the Court of Frost and Starlight novella, which I thought was pretty terrible and boring, the best part about having that book was that it included the first two chapters, I believe, 2 or 3 chapters of this current book of A Court of Silver Flames, and the writing was better, the plot seemed interesting, and it's following my 2 favorite characters in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. So I am so in for this book, and like I said, this is going to be spoiler filled, talking about the book with you guys, which I assume you also are reading or listening to this series as well. So as of right now, I have 18 hours and 32 minutes left, and I am on chapter 9. I'm about halfway through chapter 9. I think the beginning of this book is actually pretty masterfully written to kind of just jump you into the plot, into the issue, and what's going to be happening with our characters here forward. So I think Sarah J Maas does such a good job of just introducing Nesta in the state that she's in right now and doing it very efficiently. One, I really liked the prologue, and it's really short, but it does such a great, kind of creepy, tragic job of why Nesta being thrown into the cauldron, which ultimately transforms her into a fae, which to me seems like a sweet deal, but why that was so traumatic for her. Trying to convince its audience, yeah, this was a terrible event. You can kind of understand why she has issues with that, even though objectively it's you got to basically be an immortal superhuman and you get to live forever with the rest of your family that also gets to live forever. You know, it's it's kind of a hard thing to sell that was a bad event. Establishes the tone of the story. Nesta is not Farah. You know, Nesta is a lot harsher and colder and meaner, which is why I liked her so much. She was just such a brutally honest character, and I really like establishing her in that really rundown, terrible, decrepit apartment and kind of the misery that she's allowing herself to live in, and how she's, you know, distant and cut off from the rest of her family. The one thing in that setup that I find peculiar is that Nesta is sleeping around. She's sleeping with a lot of random males and she won't even find out their names. I find this a little bit, not a little bit, I find this very out of character for Nesta, because Nesta strikes me as a woman like other women in my life. There's a handful that I know who are not particularly affectionate people. They're like that as children, they're like that with their friends and family. You know, not that there's not love there, but they're just not people who are super touchy-feely, either for giving or receiving. And Nesta always struck me as that kind of person. She clearly loves the people that she cares about, but she's not huggy and kissy and touching, you know, that's just not her character. So sleeping around with random people to get some sort of comfort or release just struck me as very odd. It also kind of gives me Crescent City flashbacks with Bryce, where Sarah J Maas is clearly, although not explicitly, saying sleeping around with random people is not healthy behavior, but also weirdly doesn't want to actually get into that or make that too explicit. It's kind of hard to explain without reading it, but it just feels like that's the one action that these books want to give the least amount of consequence to, both emotionally or physically, when it's like, but that is damaging behavior, and you're including that alongside other damaging behavior like over drinking, overspending, and gambling, you know, not taking care of yourself, getting too thin, wasting away. But anyway, I love that by the end of the second chapter, we're just already jumping in to the actual plot of Nesta having to go off and train with Cassian. And, you know, Farah's just like, this is what you have to do. It's my fault for letting it drag on too long. It makes me really like Farah, because of Court and Thorns and Roses, you're stuck with Farah the entire time. And there's definitely points where I'm annoyed with her, or you question how much she's grown. But in that situation, it's like, oh, she does feel like an elegant, mature, rational queen of the night court in a way that Nesta does not. And then there's kind of the subplot with Cassian, besides training and watching Nesta in the House of Wind, where Rysand is like, we want you to be a courtesan, do more like interpersonal politics with our allies, which as a reader, I love. When I think about it from a logical in-world perspective, I'm like, why? Why? Cassie even makes this point where he's just like, I'm a warrior. I'm a really good general. And it's like, yeah, you don't just casually switch roles, especially ones that are so different from each other. Like, that doesn't really make sense, but on like an entertainment level, it is absolutely delightful. And you know he's going to grow more in that way. And I am excited to see that. Obviously, the point of this book is to get Nesta and Cassian to fall in love. And my girl Sarah, as much as I love and adore her books like no other, I would not say that she's necessarily the absolute best at being subtle with characters getting together romantically. There's not a lot of tension or actual buildup, but there kind of is here, because while Cassian and his POV chapters, it's very obvious that he's still like attracted and has a lot of affection for Nesta. It's not so clear with Nesta how she feels about him, and it's not clear to me how these two characters are going to collide and end up together. And I hope it's slow. I hope this is an actual slow burn for these two, that it's not just going to like happen, which is how all the other previous relationships are. I would love if this, you know, had a little bit more give and take, a little bit more suspense. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. And Nesta getting herself together and working through whatever she has to work through and rebuilding her relationships with her friends and family. That's also not very clear how she's going to do that in an authentic and meaningful way. We're just kind of tiptoeing into what the overarching plot might be, with the mention of the remaining 4 human queens, that there might be some chaos brewing with them, that the king of the autumn court might be working with them to try to secure lands in the human world or something like that. So it's like, okay, there's some stuff going on here. The Court of Thorns and Roses series, especially Wings of Ruin, was very epic in scope. So it would be nice to kind of be like, hey, we can't go that big again without it feeling inauthentic. But we'll see. I'm really excited. I'm gonna listen to more of it today, and then I will check back in with you guys with where I'm at, how I feel, and I think this is going to be a really fun reading vlog. So I will see you guys later.
Hi guys, Editing Claire here, and just wanted to let you guys know that my Audible account has a glitch and I get 2 completely different timestamps with where I am in the book. So what I think I'm about to tell you in the next clip is wrong, so keep that in mind with future clips as well.
Hello everyone. So according to Audible, I have 15 hours and 34 minutes left of A Court of Silver Flame, and flame or flames? Flames. And I just started chapter 18. So I have some thoughts of the previous like 6 chapters I just consumed. So first of all, I'm really enjoying this book thus far. I love listening to it. It's something I look forward to listening to. It doesn't feel like a chore, and I do just love being in Sarah J Maas's fairy world. So let's just get that out of the way. There's been some changes, a few developments that are interesting. So one, we've been introduced to Gwen. I like Gwen. I don't really have much opinion other than that. I think the library scenes are a little dull for a fantasy library, and which is a huge trope. Like every fantasy book has a magical or mystical library that's kind of funky and mysterious and weird. So it was kind of exciting that Nesta was going to spend so much time there, but it's kind of boring. I'm not super into the priestesses being these traumatized women who can barely stand to look somebody new in the eyes, who like keep their cloaks on all the time and just run around. I don't find that inherently interesting. I think Nesta putting up that sign to try to see if any will volunteer to train with her and Cassian, I feel like I can see where that plot line might be going. The training with Cassian thing, I like, but also I'm nervous about where it's going, because what I actually really like about it is the idea of Nesta going through these exercises and literally just becoming more grounded in her body and realizing that working out, even just focusing on balance and breath, helps with her like mental health problems. The part that makes me nervous, they just keep bringing up like, oh, why don't the Illyrians have any female warriors? Now she's starting to do some hand-to-hand combat work. I personally found it so much more enjoyable, even though it's more subtle, to focus on like just exercise as a form of self-care. The line that I'm afraid it's gonna go down is like all the priestesses, all the female Illyrians and Nesta need to become these epic warrior babes. Every fantasy book, every YA book, even though this book I'm not sure is technically YA anymore, all the female characters, even if they don't start out that way, they have to turn into these hyper warrior type ladies. And one of the things I really liked about Nesta in the Court of Thorns and Roses series was that she wasn't that. Plus we already saw Farah go through that warrior lady transformation in the first series. I'm not looking for a repeat. We also went through Nesta and Cassian's first big blow up at each other, where Cassian says that everyone hates her. And I just got done with a fight with Nesta and Elaine, where Elaine, you know, came to the castle and Nesta just says a bunch of nasty things to her. And I am starting to feel like these blow-ups are repetitious. And granted, I think that's the point a little bit, because that's obviously how the characters outside of Nesta, the people who love her, are feeling. Like, this is repetitive, this is exhausting, we want Nesta to move on and get over this, and in the like healthiest, most loving way possible. And so I'm starting to feel that like, oh my gosh, Nesta, chill out. But objectively, as a reader, it is starting to get a little exhausting to hear her just be so vicious to everyone. And I guess in the original series, she was vicious, but it was also kind of funny. Like, there was a charm or wit about the way she would tear people down, and often very deservingly. Like, she was just one of the more rational characters in that series, but now she's just being cruel to everyone, and that just can feel a little boring after a while, because I can start to predict how she's going to react to something or someone. I'm also just starting chapter 18. I am about a third of the way through the book, maybe closer to a fourth. But either way, if there starts to become more of a turnaround with Nesta, then I will feel even those moments of repetition are worth it, because it's part of the development. I'm just nervous that I'm just going to hear the same fight over and over and over again. For people outside of Nesta, like what Cassian said and then what Elaine said and what Farah said, it's kind of all been the same thing. So I'm just re-listening to the same thing said by different characters. Also, I got to listen to Nesta and Cassian's first like hot and heavy encounter, and that was a lot. What you expect, it's also what you want out of a Sarah J Maas book, but it was right at the time that I got in my car. It switched from being on my headphones to being to my Bluetooth in my car, and that scene was just blasting out of my speakers. I was hoping for a romance that wasn't so immediate and obvious. Not the most subtle thing in the world, but exactly how these characters are going to come together in an intimate and vulnerable way is still up in the air, and I find that interesting. So, and the other thing that I'm very keen on was when Rhys and Cassian and I can't remember his name right now, but the Prince of the Autumn Court met near the Spring Court, and they were talking about how Tamlin is just in his beast form and his court and his mansion are falling apart and he doesn't even care and blah blah blah. And I'm like, man, I love Tamlin. I really, really hope we get to see what's going on, because I think that's so interesting that Tamlin is just in his beast form forever because he just has a lot of guilt and feels bad. And Cassian talks about how, like, oh, he would just rip Tamlin apart still and blah blah blah. And I don't know, Tamlin's now saved Farrah's life multiple times, saved Rhys's life. He wasn't a great partner to Farrah. The poor boy was stressed. I don't know. I like Tamlin a lot, so I really hope that he comes back as a full-on character. I think that will be so fun. And Rhys is obviously going through something's bothering him, and I like that that's actually a secret right now. Something in previous Sarah J Maas series that always drove me nuts is there would be a hint that like something's going on and it's a secret, and then she would spoil that secret like a second later. Like we never as the reader got to just live in the mystery. We never just got to feel that because she would just spoil it herself, literally sometimes a chapter later. This has been going on for the whole book where like something is clearly wrong with Rhys outside of this Nesta situation, and even it kind of seems like outside of the queens and whatever trouble is brewing, and I'm very interested in that. So that is where I'm at in this series. I will update you guys once I'm a little bit further along. All right, guys, so this is probably going to be my last update for part 1 because this is definitely going to be a multi-part video. I have 13 and a half hours left to go, so not quite at the halfway point, but close. I more just wanted to talk some things out that I kind of shared with my friends because I think I've been able to pinpoint what about this series is working and not working for me. And I kind of touched on it already. So I have a friend who's read the Court of Thorns and Roses series and loved it, and she was thinking about getting into this book, although it was not a top priority. So she kind of let me talk about it, like beginning spoilers, nothing crazy. It's about Nesta and Cassian. Starts with Nesta's perspective. She's really downtrodden and broken after what happened to her father, and she was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, she's really cold. She cut out people in her life. She's having drinking problems. She's living alone. And she's like, yeah, that sounds like Nesta. And I'm like, yeah, and she's having rampant sexual affairs with random strangers almost every night. And she's like, wait, what? Like that just does not feel like Nesta. That doesn't sound like something Nesta would do. Like if Nesta was going through an emotional crisis, she would not be seeking that sort of companionship even on a exclusive sexual basis. It's like she would, much like with how she is emotionally towards her friends and family, it feels like she's the type of character that would physically be that way, especially towards strangers. She does not feel like somebody that just warms up to strangers easily. But then I was going on about how, you know, Cassian and her having all these sexual encounters now that are very explicit and erotic, but in a way that feels like it's distracting from the story. Like I'll be reading a chapter and I'll be really into what's going on. Like Nesta's struggling with her powers, Cassian is struggling with Nesta, and all these things that are happening with like the Spring Court and the Autumn Court and this potential war that might break out, and then just this overly graphic, overly long sex scene that like lacks any emotional connection. And to me, it's like, okay, Cassian, who is another character that I love, that I adore, that I have a lot of affection for, who knows that, at least in this universe, Nesta is acting out using sex as a band-aid. So the fact that he, who in a way is kind of being like a guardian and a mentor towards her right now, is seeking her out for sexual means just feels so inappropriate and wrong of him to do, and it makes me think less of him. And then it also, especially some of the things that Sarah J Maas has been writing about Nesta, they're just gross. They're just overly graphic and disgusting, and such a huge like turn off to the character. And I just feel so weird about both of them when this kind of stuff happens. And if I take out those hyper explicit parts, if I just ignore them and erase them from my memory and just go with what remains, it's actually a really sweet and endearing story about kind of like a hate to love friendship to sort of courting or admitting feelings for each other. And it's like, that is so charming. All of this sexual detail that just feels out of place for the characters and for like just the moment of time we're in. It's like, this is not the time for that. This is not the headspace we're in right now. And the fact that these two like haven't admitted out loud really feelings for each other, it just makes the whole thing feel wonky, out of place. It kind of feels like Sarah J Maas is trying to prove a point, and it's just distracting, kind of unprofessional, reads as fan fiction. However, a lot of the things surrounding that I do find really good. Thus far, my favorite scene is when Nesta is asleep and she's freaking out and she has those silver flames coming out of her body and she's screaming, and Cassian is trying to get to her. Azriel is holding him back, and Rhysand comes in and is like fighting her power with his power. It's like, yes, this is how I remember like the tone and like just the aspects of Court of Thorns and Roses that I really enjoyed. All that stuff between Nesta and Cassian that's just hyper explicit is just so unnecessary when this is the stuff that is like driving the story forward. It's interesting in regards to Nesta and Cassian and the like plot as a whole. Although I will say, okay, so I just got to the bog, but before that, when Cassian had to like make out with Nesta in front of all their friends and family to like get her out of the scrying that she was doing, was the most ridiculous thing. But at least it was ridiculous in like kind of a hilarious fun way and not a disgusting and gross way. Also, I wanted to make a point, because I am listening to this over Audible, so I wanted to check out the reviews. I just kind of glanced at them, and the vast majority of the reviews, at least on Audible, have really taken a beating on the narrator. And this is not a narrator we've had before for any of the Sarah J Maas series, which makes sense because we're doing a different point of view character. So we're getting a different woman than the two that I've read the Court of Thorns and Roses series. I don't mind that. A lot of them have said that she's like over dramatic and the way that she reads is wrong. I will say I do not really like the way that she reads Nesta, especially because the two previous voice actors for the Courts of Thorns and Roses series did such a good job with Nesta, where just from the cadence of her voice, where it was kind of nasally, it just had like an uppity attitude about her all the time, and I could just picture that girl in my head so well because of how they read her voice. And for whatever reason, this voice actress is not reading her that way. And I find that very bizarre. I don't really mind any of the other way she's reading the other characters, honestly. It does not bother me, but the Nesta one does. I will say she's also a very emotional reader. For other series, that would probably really bother me. But this is a Sarah J Maas series. The actual performance of her readings has not been an issue for me, other than her cadence with Nesta, who's the main character. So the fact that that's off obviously is a bit bothersome. The vast majority of Audible reviews are giving the performance like 1-star ratings. I would not say that personally. I would probably give it a solid like 3.75. So that's where I'm at with the series. I will definitely continue to make little clips while I listen to Court of Silver Flames, compiled into a part 2 for this reading vlog series. So thank you so much for listening. Let me know about your thoughts down below. Although be careful, try to keep it to things that I've already talked about within the book, you know, not too spoilery for both myself and anybody else who might be watching this particular video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.